gentle marketers. Welcome to episode 52 of the Gentle Business Revolution podcast, the show where we talk about marketing your business by disrupting the current marketing paradigm and changing it to a gentler approach, one that's based on empathy and kindness. I'm Sarah Znakrochi, I'm the host here, and you know that you're in the right place if you are a heart-centered entrepreneur or change maker who is looking for a better way to market your business. Or you might also be a marketing impact pioneer, so someone that's working for an organization who does business for good. Today's episode falls under the P of personal power of the Gentle Marketing Mandala. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can download your one-page marketing plan with the gentle marketing version of the 7 Ps of marketing at sarahznakrochi.com/1 page. One page. It comes with 7 email prompts to really help you reflect upon these different Ps. So today's topic is embodied leadership. And I was thinking about this, and if embodiment is not about personal power, then I don't know what is. Because embodiment just, I don't know, I see this personal power in the word itself. And I would say that for the first time ever, I really understood what embodiment really means, thanks to my guest Justine's beautiful explanation. So Justine Bloome is a certified meditation teacher, magnetic marketing strategist, and mentor to embodied leaders and soulpreneurs. Justine transformed her own life, career, and business using mindfulness and embodiment practices. She teaches the power of self-leadership to elevate the way we empower ourselves and others. In this conversation, we talk about embodiment and what that means, how embodied leaders will heal the world, according to Justine. Justine's realization that she was actually living in a matrix, and we realize that a lot of people are living in a matrix. We talk about silence, meditation, and other tools to help us get out of that matrix and really become aware and embodied. We also talk about the impact of COVID-19 on leadership and what has changed and what will change even more in the next year. And how embodiment is really all about being whole. And that has so much to do with gentle marketing as well, as be whole, bring more of you to your marketing. This is like most, if not all, of the conversations on this show, a truly deep and inspiring exchange. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Justine Bloome. Hi, Justine. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you, Sarah?
Yes, I'm good. It's very early for you.
That's okay.
It's always a challenge with the West Coast.
Well, it's summertime, so the sun's up. If this was the winter time, it might feel a little bit harder.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. So true. So today I had you on because we wanted to talk about embodied leadership. And you have this beautiful phrase on your About page, and it says, "I believe embodied leaders will heal the world." So beautiful.
Thank you.
Do you define embodied leadership? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, to me, embodied leadership, it's an evolving definition for sure. But I think one of the easiest ways to describe it is that there are leaders that lead from wholeness and from a place of balance between their heart and their head. As I said, they're whole of self. They're not just a professional self. A professional self tends to be more ego-led, more rational and head-led, and ignores a lot of the other intelligence that our body can give us. So in order to stay present in their body, it's about remaining aware of physical, emotional, and mental responses in any given situation. And that ultimately gives them a wealth of additional data and signals from which they can make decisions as a leader. And what that leads to is usually decisions that are more conscious of the collective, of individual human beings as human beings. I think it often leads to less competitive behaviors, less decisions made from scarcity, and more likely to be seeking a win-win solution. So I think that's probably the best way of defining embodied leadership at the moment, although I think it's evolving.
I love that. I had never heard it described this way. And then it's one of these words that kind of like holistic. You know, it's become a bit of a buzzword, and everyone has probably their own definition of what it means, but I had never heard it described the way you described it in such a beautiful way. And yeah, really this idea of coming from whole self, like, and not being split between a professional you and a personal you. I love that. So thank you for that definition. Also, the idea of ego-led or awareness led. I love that.
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with, the way that society, I guess, raises us or conditions us to value certain aspects of personality and conditions us to think about the way success can be achieved, or even the definition of success. And it often means abandoning certain needs or urges that we naturally have as human beings in order to get ahead. And so I think where we're seeing a shift is embodied leaders are those that are probably trained in more Eastern principles, to be honest. They're trained in ways that and practices that consciously expand their awareness of self and of others. So whether that's meditation or Tai Chi or Qigong or yoga or even just a somatic practice of any type, it means that they are integrating all aspects of self in the way that they move through the workplace and through the world. They're often those people, you can identify them, they're better listeners. They tend to be more empathetic in a very empowering way. They're the people that embrace differences and seek to understand so that they can empower individual strengths rather than trying to have, uniformity and people acting in a similar way to get the same job done. You can really spot these people when you start to understand how they act and how they move through the world.
Yeah, I totally know what you mean, and I can see which. Yeah, I can see them in front of my eyes, and it's this embodiment is really like also some kind of groundedness. Some like there's just like they even stand up differently in a way. They're just centered somehow.
I agree. Yeah, physicality, like they move differently. They move slower.
Yeah,
they move more intentionally.
Yeah,
they're not as reactive, more responsive. You can definitely spot them and learn from them in the workplace.
Yeah, we'll get back to this, but I kind of also want to get into your story a bit because I think it really relates to the work that you're doing now with embodied leadership. So why don't you tell us about your realization that the world you lived in was a matrix? That's what you say on your About page. And I think it's quite intriguing. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I think it was a slow and steady realization for me. However, I think collectively we're all kind of waking up to this at the moment just through force, I guess, and collective change of circumstance globally. But I think the matrix that I realized I was living in was exactly as I described, socially, from a parents and the way that I was taught, perspective, school, everything had trained me to believe that success looked one way. And it was very material, it was career-led, it was advancement and achievement over other things that could bring happiness. And I think what that led to was ultimately just a very rigid goal set that I needed to reach the top of my chosen profession. And that decisions were made ultimately based with just my head, because that's the kind of conditioning that is programmed in the mind. Mm-hmm. It's definitely not conditioning that happens in the heart. Mm. And so I think that slow and steady realization it felt like increasing discomfort. And discomfort with, I was advancing, I was very successful at achieving these goals, but the closer I got to them, the greater the discomfort in my body and in myself and in my experience of life. And so I had to open my eyes to it and say, well, if this is the thing you've always wanted and the thing you've been striving for decades now, why does this feel awful? Mm-hmm. And that's really when I think the realization of this treadmill of hustle that so many of us get on, it's built for us by the systems and structures that teach us to value that in the first place, but then ultimately there are systems and structures designed to keep us on that treadmill of hustle and grind by conditioning us to distrust ourselves and our own power, and to seek the validation of external achievement, promotion, recognition. All of those things are really put on a pedestal. And the internalized trust of ourselves is seen as very woo. It's seen as, hippie, like all the words and language that people use to kind of categorize someone who internally trusts themselves and their intuition as being a little fringe and abnormal. And I think that realization that kept me stuck in this matrix of constantly seeking that external validation meant that it took me a long time to really come back to myself and trust my inner guidance system, which ultimately, in such a short period of time, has been a game changer for not only my success, but also my happiness. Mm-hmm. So it's that separation from self. That to me is what the matrix is. It is inbuilt, designed to keep us separate from self and separate from one another, let's be honest. And I think that collectively is what we are seeing really play out on a global stage right now. The awareness of separation has felt almost hyper intense and hyper visceral because we have physically had to isolate from one another. And so I think the matrix is being revealed.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I sometimes refer to it as the trance, the trance of busyness, right? And if you're constantly in this trance of busyness and doing and achieving and just like the everyday life, well, you never actually have time to think about, who you really are, what you really want, because there's always the next thing. It's always just rinse, repeat. Every day is the same. And in some of these big organizations, your whole day is planned. And then at night you go out with your colleagues and it's just this trance. In the end, you wake up, you're 65 and you're like, what have I done with my life? So matrix or trance, same idea. So you're saying that currently, yes, under, with the virus, are you just hoping that people are waking up, or are you seeing signs everywhere?
Oh no, definitely seeing signs everywhere. I think the cult of hustle is being questioned. Mm. I think we've had many, many decades of achievement and success being a religion. And, this isn't in all cultures, let's be honest. I mean, in Western culture, I think achievement and success as a religion has been, the order of the day.
Right.
And I think what is happening right now is people are realizing when that is stripped away, when we're suddenly all isolated and we're with our families and we're facing an uncertain future, then we start to question everything that we were doing, like all of that effort, that busyness. We were kind of as you say, in a trance that we were a slave to the message that nothing comes without effort. Mm-hmm. And I think what I've seen is people have been forced to change out of that effort, that hustle, that grind, that striving, and come back to being just through sheer circumstance. And what they are realizing and what they are experiencing is receiving without effort. Now, this isn't a case for everybody. I know there are a lot of people who are doing it really tough right now. So I don't want to presuppose that this is for everyone. And I do think that there is an element of privilege that is involved in this. Again, that's societal structures that we could go down a rabbit hole on. But I do believe that the more we can lose this equation of being is laziness, like surrender and trust is weakness. That's kind of what we're programmed to believe. And we're programmed to value busyness regardless of productivity or effectiveness. Mm-hmm. I think what people are realizing right now is, I can do less and still receive. And in some cases, get more. And I think there's a reprogramming, even if that is, I'm getting a government stimulus check. I'm at home, not able to do anything, and I'm still receiving. And that is on a subconscious level, reprogramming some of this hustle, strive, nothing comes without effort programming.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think the message, it's like an unlearning and relearning. Like your brain is so wired for the hustle that like only now, and it's been 4 or 5 months already, only now people are starting slowly to realize this, where in the first 1 or 2 months, it was like, chaos. Like, what am I doing? I'm at home. I'm not working. How's this am I going to get fired? And, and companies had to relearn as well that their employees, at least the good companies with the good leaders, their employees were still working and they were, just as efficient, but probably did have more time to just be and rest. Just think about the commute. They didn't have to commute anymore. And so I couldn't agree more. There's definitely a slow, or not really slow because 5 months is not a long time, but there's a shift in people's values and mindset about this whole idea of gotta hustle, gotta do more.
I agree with you. I think the first few months, people kind of had a let's just get through this mentality. Yeah. Like it'll be over soon. We just have to be patient or suck it up. And I think the shift has been more recently where people have started to understand this is much longer term than they had initially expected.
Right.
And have had to reevaluate. And I am seeing long-time strivers and hustlers that have even been in my teams in the past. I'm seeing them take extended sabbaticals and extended breaks to say, okay, well, actually, maybe I want to take this time to do my own thing rather than keep hustling in the job that I was in, working from home, and having those reevaluation periods where the unlearning, as you said, is very real right now. It kind of feels like the same unlearning I had when I moved from New York to where I am now in Oregon. I had a 4-month period where I couldn't work because of my work visa status change. And I spent that whole 4 months unlearning everything I had been programmed to do in New York. And it was such a gift. And I think that is the gift that everybody has right now.
Yeah, I couldn't. Yeah, it's so true. And maybe we get even a bit more time than 4 months, right? Because a lot of these people, maybe you were already kind of, interested probably. And we'll talk about
Correct.
meditation and all of that you're doing now, but you're already open to this. Well, right now we're talking about people who have never been, like even taking a 2-week vacation was like too much. How could I do that? And I can't just miss that much work. And so there is definitely like an even bigger unlearning having to happen for them. And so maybe they will need a year to unlearn some of these things.
Yeah, it'll take as long as it takes. And I do believe the pandemic and other situations will hang around just as long as it takes.
I agree. So how do you work with people today, and how do you help leaders who maybe have been stuck in the matrix, still are, or kind of are pointing their nose and they're like, I want to be where you are. How do I get there? So how do you help them?
Yeah, quite simply, it's about bringing ourselves into expanded states of self-awareness. So ultimately, it's about coming back to, as I mentioned earlier, coming back to that internalized sense of trust of who we are and of wholeness. And we can build this muscle, and I truly believe it is a skill, through meditation, journaling. There are other mindfulness practices, but ultimately you are learning what embodied leadership feels like from a perspective of self-leadership first. And that feels like a sense of trust that doing less can lead to receiving more. It feels like an interest and a desire to understand humanity at a really deep level rather than just, numbers on a spreadsheet. It feels like a belief in something greater than ourselves and a collective wisdom versus our very competitive nature, which keeps us in separateness. And ultimately, it allows us to tap into that intuitive data that is less tangible and often harder to articulate at first, but it is more correct and more trustworthy than, the tangible data that we've been relying on in business for so long. And I think all of that helps us to feel what that feels like in ourselves. It helps us to self-lead in an embodied way, and that naturally awakens us to the impact we can have when we lead this way with others. And often people will start mirroring that back to you. So it does have just an effect by osmosis in that way.
Yeah, and I can totally testify to that. Like when I started meditating, probably about 5 years ago, I obviously immediately thought, oh, it'd be nice if my husband, Tony, would also meditate. But I believe, and you can tell me what you think, but I believe it's really hard to convince someone to say, okay, this would really help you. You should get more aware and this will make your life better. But just by watching me and me talking about it, he then eventually, about 18 months ago, started to be more interested in meditation and now is using it himself. So I totally believe that if a leader of a company, says rest is important, meditation is important, then you lead by example, right? I think that definitely will help also get your employees into that mindset. But
Absolutely.
What do you think? Can we like probably all the clients that come to you, they come with an openness to those topics, right? It's not the wife who says, here's my husband, he needs your help.
Absolutely. One of the things about embodied leaders is they recognize that everybody is on their own journey, and that everybody is at a different point along that journey. And that's okay. Not everybody needs to be at the same point on the journey as you. And excuse me, exactly as you describe, when I'm talking to my meditation students, one of the final things I leave them with is, don't become a meditation evangelist. Like, don't go to all of your family and your friends and try and convince them that they've been missing out. Because people need to find it in their own way, in their own time, at the moment in their lives when it's going to have the deepest impact. And you're right. The embodiment piece is you just living your life in that way, and people notice it. It is one of the best motivators to stick to your meditation practice, is having people recognize, I've noticed a change in you. Yeah. The way you responded in that situation was so different to how I've seen you react in the past. You know, those kinds of pieces of feedback, people recognize it and get curious, and they say, well, how did this change happen? What do you attribute this to? And that's when the invitation comes to talk about the role of meditation in your life. And that curiosity and that invitation needs to come from the other person. You can't force it on them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. And it is tempting, that's when I first realized, how some religions, they're kind of forced upon you, where people come knock into your door and try to convince you. And that's the first time when I learned about meditation, and did so many good things to my life, I finally had some compassion for these people. I'm like, well, they found their thing, and now obviously they want to tell everybody, but it doesn't work that way. So it's so interesting. Yeah. We kind of talked about COVID-19 already, kind of in the larger sense, how do you see organizations change? Like, we talked about how leaders will change. How do you see organizations change? Like, I'm talking just about, when I think hustle, for example, I also think about grind and the going to work every morning, the commute and that kind of, like, I don't know, it just all feels very gray to me. It's like this business world that is just so gray. How do you see that change in a way going forward?
Yeah, I love this question. It's been on my mind a lot, because I do think we are at the very early stages of a paradigm shift. And I think, again, and same answer as I had at the beginning, it will evolve. But for right now, what I believe we are entering into is a new age of sovereignty for individuals. So remote working will change the dynamics on the surface, for sure. Mm-hmm. But beneath that, this to me is a gateway for greater self-leadership potential in all of us. And as we all reprioritize and reassess the role of work in the context of our whole life, I think at first we will see a subtle shift in this, but as individuals find their confidence and their power as sovereign self-leaders, I think we may see a shift to blended workforces where entrepreneurial freelancers and flexible organizational structures become the norm, where you've got partnership of these entrepreneurial workforces in partnership with employee structures. Mm-hmm. And that has huge implications for culture, building workplace community, even remuneration, and how contributors are incentivized to be invested in the success of the venture. It will impact communications, how we map careers and help people to define success for themselves. It has such broad-reaching implications beyond just what we see at the surface right now is people are appreciating the flexibility that remote working gives them. So I do see there being tectonic shifts and transformations in the way that organizational leaders will need to rethink their systems and structures and how they engage human beings, not numbers on a spreadsheet, but how these human beings and their sovereignty can be honored in the way that they show up in the workplace.
Yeah. I also see less, since, leaders are becoming more embodied and aware, I see less focus on individualism, meaning for people, so the ego thing, or even for companies. And like what you said, more openness to collaborations. So none of this, competitive thing anymore. It's like, how can we collaborate and maybe also, I just recorded a podcast earlier about the triple bottom line. So also more interest towards not just our own profit and not just our own, hustle, but then also how can we participate? How can we contribute to make the world a better place? And I think that all starts with embodied leadership and self-awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I had a similar conversation on a different podcast recently where we were talking about conscious capitalism, and I played devil's advocate and said, well, maybe conscious capitalism isn't visionary enough. Conscious capitalism feels like it's an iteration on the structure we already have.
Right.
And it isn't. I think we can pull apart capitalism and come up with something potentially more post-socialist in our organizational structures. And I think we are seeing signals of that already. The millennial generation and the way that they have approached entrepreneurialism has already broken down all of those rules around competitiveness. Mm-hmm. So that has already happened in the next generation of the workforce. And their entrepreneurial spirit is very different to the current, leadership in entrepreneurs. I think then you're going to have Gen Z or Gen Z, their own unique brand of I honestly think it's post-socialism. Socialism has such baggage, just like communism does, but I believe that there are new systems and principles and theories of how we as a collective work together towards the greater good that will emerge, I believe, out of the next generation of youth, because we're already seeing it in the way that they're participating in politics and in the economy before they can vote. Yeah. So, the change is coming, whether you like it or not. And I think the organizations that are going to pay attention to this and use this time to reevaluate what their structure is in the future, they will be so set up for success. And I think they will build stronger communities around them as people are just generally reevaluating where they spend their money. Mm-hmm. That's what's happening right now.
Mm-hmm. And I think you're right. It's a new form that will emerge because this generation doesn't have the history of, communism and capitalism and socialism and all these things. They're just going to take bits and pieces maybe from all of these systems. In a way, what we're seeing with B corporations, it's the both and, right? It's profit and people and planet. So in a way, I think that's where we're heading. It's like you said, a new form of doing business that will emerge. And you're so right. These new generations, they'll never put up with what we put up with. So good for them.
Yeah, they're already out of the matrix.
Yes.
God love them.
Yes. Anything else that we didn't talk about that you would like to add about this topic of embodied leadership and, the new leaders, what they really need in order to lead us to this new future?
I think just one final comment, because we've talked a lot about the polarities of hustle versus being, striving versus stillness. It's very easy to fall into these binary conversations, and I think that's a lot of what we're seeing wrong in the world right now. I think the final message really is embodied leadership is not in opposition to any of those things. It's the integration of doing and being in a way that is intentional. It is embodied, it's heart and head, it's using all of the systems. It's the integration of those. That is what we can be moving towards. And so I don't want people to sort of walk away thinking, well, I can just stop doing altogether and things will happen for me.
Right.
We've got to get out of these binary polarities and the competitive opposition kind of frameworks that the matrix keeps us stuck in, and come back to center. That's generally what meditation does, is it brings you back to center. And that center feels like integration of the best of all of this.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so true. There's so many paradoxes everywhere in what we shared, right? And it's the combination of all of it that really is the answer, and not the either or, but the both and.
Yeah, there's a lot of demonization of one side or the other that happens on every level of society. I still see a lot of like hustle culture leaders, even now, saying, well, now's the time to put your head down and grind. And, demonizing people who are taking time away and taking this as an opportunity to really sit back and reevaluate. Let's not demonize one side or the other. Everybody's on their own path. Everybody's on their own journey. Embrace all of it. And I think that's the answer that I think is going to help us navigate a new future.
Yeah. And again, the person that's still hustling, unfortunately, there's no point of pointing fingers at them either, right? Because they're just not there in their path. And
that's right. That's where they're at on their journey. I don't point the finger at them. I don't like the way they demonize the opposite. Yeah. So it's their behavior that I point to rather than them as an individual.
Yeah, same with gentle marketing. I say the same thing. It's like, I'm not writing this book or talking about gentle marketing to point the finger at people who use the hypey kind of marketing, because I've done that myself. And so I have evolved in the journey, and I'm now saying there is another way that actually feels better. So that doesn't mean that hype marketing or I am saying hype marketing increases anxiety, but I'm not saying you're a bad person because you're using hype marketing, right? I think that's
correct. Yeah.
Our message. Yeah.
And that's where the embodiment comes from, because what you just described increases anxiety. It's a feeling. Yeah. You're bringing people back into their bodies to recognize the impact of that activity in their body. And that's bringing people back to embodiment.
Right. Wow. We could go on and on and on. I think, our message is just very much aligned. And I need to listen to that introduction where you described embodied leadership again, because it was just so beautiful. But this has been a delight. I want you to share where people can find out more about your work. And
sure. The best place is my website. So JustineBloome.com. And mostly on Instagram, I've got to say, although I've been kind of a little absent off social media as I unplug from the matrix. But Instagram is also Justine.Bloome.
Wonderful. The last question that I ask all my guests, what are you grateful for today or this week?
Oh, every day I stay in gratitude for the little things. To me, that is the joy of life, the ability to recognize a hummingbird that flew past my window this morning, or the feeling of the grass under my feet when I walked outside this morning with my dog. You know, those little moments, that is what keeps me so grounded in the present moment and just makes me feel grateful for being alive during this momentous time in the world.
Wonderful. I love your view on this. I think if we're alive today, there's a reason for it, right?
Completely agree. We signed up for this.
Yes. Thanks so much for coming onto the show, Justine. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can find out more about Justine and her work at justinebloome.com, and Bloom is with an E at the end. Check out all the links also in the show notes at sarahsanacroce.com/GBR52. Also, don't forget, you can go over to sarahsanacroce.com/Kickstarter and hit notify to be sure to know when our Kickstarter campaign goes live in December. I'm working on preparing things like crazy, and I can't wait. Even though it feels like it's still far away, it is not. I hope you'll join me on this journey to a kinder marketing paradigm. Please invite your friends if you feel like they're gentle marketers as well. And let's just be the change we want to see in the world. Speak to you soon.